My name is Gene Latoile from Four Star Farms. We're down in Northfield, Massachusetts. My son recently got a new drone, so there's going to be a lot of these pictures in the presentation. We farm about 17 acres of hops in Northfield, Mass. As Heather said, we've been doing it for about 10 years. We put in the hops in various stages. This little piece over here was our first yard. We put in about 600 plants of 6 different varieties to see what would grow and what didn't, and we found out a lot that didn't. Our next yard was here. We added to that here. There's about almost 7 acres here, and then this piece we put in last is about 10 acres there. So we've been doing it. We enjoy doing it. And like I said, whether we continue doing it depends on whether we can sell it. A lot of brewers are interested, but we still got inventory, so we need to be able to sell what we got. One little thing that I wanted to bring up, if there are small growers, there's a little thing called the pardalera. I found out about it this year. A lot of people might know about it. This is made in Spain. It's made for basically one person to string without climbing up a ladder in the back of a pickup like I've seen some people do. It goes fairly quick. And I'll let you see what he does. And the string is tied. So that seems to work pretty well. We got a couple this year. Obviously, we don't need it for the size operation we have, but if the guys are stringing and they miss a string, or if a string breaks or we need to replace them, rather than trying to get the lift back out there, it works pretty well to just, go out and put up 2 or 3 strings. Now, we have strung in a number of different ways. This is the way we first used to do it. That's a fairly slow operation. Doing it this way, the strings would pull out, and if you're going along the wire, I'm sure a lot of you have seen, you tend to pull the strings and you end up with a cluster of 10 in one place and a lot of empty space. Those that do it this way, I found out, usually have barbed wire on top as the stringing wire. The barbs prevent the strings from sliding, and that works pretty well too, but you got to be careful. It's special barbed wire that they use, that's square cut tips, so people don't totally tear up their hands as they're stringing. What we've done now, we actually go crosswise. It took a little while to learn to do this, and it took a little while to get the equipment and figure out just how to do it. I know they do it out west, and the guys can actually go a lot faster than I can drive in the yards right now. You can see how long they have to wait in between strings. This works well. The spacing always comes out very good, and it just works out a lot easier this way. We lose the other way. A lot of the strings would pull out together, and we'd end up with 5 or 10 pieces of string in different areas in the field, and we'd lose a lot of the strings. Doing it this way, we basically get 100% utilization. So besides going 3 to 4 times faster, we use the strings better. One thing we've done this year is try to do a little crowning experiment. These hops in this area are centennial. There are 5 rows of centennial, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 poles. The first 2 poles, the first 2 rows, we crowned with a mechanical crowner. It was a Fisher crowner, which occasionally works well. The next 2 rows we did nothing to, and the last row we chemically pruned with AIM. And so we burned that right back. The mechanical part was done early April. The chemical part was done May 6th. All the plants were trained at the same time. And I really don't see a lot of difference in them at this point. The disease seems to be about the same. There's very little disease pressure this year, but you can see the rows do seem fairly consistent. This row here is a different variety. It's these that are pretty much all the same. And we'll see just how they produce and any other thing. And for anybody who is doing different types of farming, this is what happens when you have corn and you don't fertilize it, and when you have potatoes and you do fertilize it. So right now, this was last week, and the potatoes are actually a lot taller than the corn. So going down the rows, you can see they're all fairly consistent. We got decent growth out of the Centennial. They're probably just about the most advanced that we have right now. Usually they tend to be a little bit more back than the others, but they're really growing well. And you'll
Hey,
be able to see a
Gene,
little more. Yeah.
it's Heather. I was wondering, when did you do both of those different treatments?
The mechanical crowning we did was the middle of April, and the chemical pruning we did May 5th. So there was, almost a month difference in when we treated. And the two middle rows we didn't do anything to. We didn't crown them or we didn't spray them. But they do look fairly consistent. It's these 5 rows right here. Let me go back just a little. Yeah, this beginning part right here, and you can see I don't see an awful lot of difference. I'm sure there are plants individually. There might be some sections, but I think that's more just the soil type, or some plants just healthier than others.
Right.
But they all look pretty good. This is the rest of our C yard. This is the largest yard, the 10-acre yard. This variety is Rackau. Then we have Magnum, and a variety we call Chaos, which is an accident. And then farther down we had Cascade, Nugget, and Mount Rainier. What we've also done in 16 and 17, we did a potato leafhopper study with Lily Calderwood, Dr. Calderwood. She's at, I guess, University of Maine right now. And the purpose of the study was to see if a trap crop on the edges would be able to trap most of the leafhoppers coming in and prevent them from getting to the hops. Now, we planted 30-foot wide buffers of alfalfa along the yards. Now, the way it works out, this is the C yard, this is the B yard, and along this edge both ways, and along this edge, we put in a 30-foot buffer crop of alfalfa. Unfortunately, in 2016, a neighbor who we swapped land with put in 24 acres of potatoes over here, and 24 acres of potatoes does an awful lot more of a trap crop than 30 acres of alfalfa. In 17, both these fields were in potatoes, and so that impacted this field quite a bit. Now, in 2016, both yards over here you can see had fairly consistent amount of leafhoppers. And you can see the big increase July 1st. July 1st is when he went through and cultivated. So in stirring up all the leafhoppers into potatoes, they just went, actually I think it was just before that, a few days before. We collected, I guess it was just about every week. We put out sticky traps and went out every week and collected all the sticky traps and counted the leafhoppers on them. And in 2016, it went from 348 total collected, and 11 days later, I guess, there were almost 6,000 total leafhoppers collected, and it went from less than 4 leafhoppers per sticky card to almost 61 per sticky card. 2017, we scaled back the experiment somewhat because we learned that, one, it's very difficult to establish the alfalfa when you're trying to drive over it and get the yards going and everything in the spring. So that they just didn't establish very well. And like I said, 20 or 30 acres of potatoes is a lot more effective as a trap than, 30 feet wide of alfalfa. And if you look both years, it's almost the same date that the peak occurred. Farmer tends to be fairly consistent in what he does. And, that's just the difference in increases. Now, if you remember in 2016, the potatoes were adjacent to both yards. In 2017, it was just south of the B yard and a little bit farther south of the C yard. So you can see this is the yard that was adjacent to where the potatoes are, and this was the one a little farther north. There's just a lot more pressure from the leafhoppers when they're right close to potatoes. This year, I've gone out, and this year actually we treated with imidacloprid. In previous years, I'd go out with bifenthrin, and when there was a problem, I'd spray for it. That takes out a lot of beneficials and other things. Not something you want to do if you don't have to. This year we put down imidacloprid as a soil drench, and last week I went through and I checked about 150 different plants, several leaves on each plant. I did not find a single leafhopper We did have a little bit of hopper burn, so I know there are some in the area, but we couldn't find any. And I just have a question. Does anybody know what this bug is? It looks almost like a little cartoon character. But there were a few of these on the undersides of the leaves. I'm hoping it's nothing serious. But that's about all we've been able to find under the leaf. There were no mites, no leaf hoppers, and I also didn't find any beneficials, but if there's nothing for them to eat, they're probably not going to be there anyway. Disease pressure this year has been minimal, fortunately. It's been a little bit damp. It was in the beginning of the year, and I thought we were going to have problems, and it came out warm and dry. We're down about 4 or 5 inches of rain from May and June. And so it is fairly dry. We're irrigating almost every day. We're not irrigating right now because we got about a ½ inch of rain last night. So that was nice. When I spray, I always rotate groups. I try and put at least 2 groups in each spray, and we're on a weekly spray schedule. I go out Fridays because some things that we put out are 48-hour reentry. And so the guys won't work. I don't have the guys working the yards on the weekend. And so we can time things that way, and it works out pretty well. There's a whole list of different things I use. Like I said, I try and use, I'll use copper and curazate at the same time. I'll use oxidate and I forget what else. But we try and mix at least 2 different chemicals, 2 different groups, and sometimes it's 3, depending on what we're trying to do, in the same batch, in the same tank mix, and we'll spray once a week. Now, harvest timing. We did.
Hey, Gene, before you
Yes,
move on, Scott says that that's a mayfly.
Jacob thought it was that. I
Yeah.
didn't know what a mayfly would be doing on the underside of a hop leaf, but
I got lost.
yeah, probably.
Plus it's June. Maybe it forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it. It kind of does look like it. Scott doesn't have a good connection, so if he can see it, he can maybe email in, but it does look like some kind of molt there.
Yeah, okay. Well, that one wasn't supposed to be hot. Where am I? Okay, that's the one I already did. I got it doubled up. I lost where I am. Oh, well. We've done some research on harvest timing also. And now, okay, I'll find something later. We've done stuff on harvest timing. And we've worked with UVM. We worked last year with them. And what we did was twice a week from 2 weeks before harvest until 2 weeks after harvest, we would go out and we would sample the hops. We'd take samples and we'd send them out to Alpha Analytics in Yakima Valley. And they would send back, total oils, moisture, and whatever else they had. And it was fairly extensive testing. And like I said, we did it to all the varieties we had, all 8 varieties, and got quite a bit of information out of it. The problem with doing it is when we sent them out to send them to the West Coast, unless you send them next day air, which is probably more than what we get in total hop harvest for the cost, it takes about 3 days to get there. They process it for a day. It takes 2 or 3 days to do the testing. And so it's about a week from when you take the sample until you get the results. And this could be the gold standard of, when is really the best time? You want to do it right in here, right in the peak of when the hops are ripe. If you go much beyond that, you tend to start getting some off flavors. If you do it before, you don't have as much flavor. And so you want to get it right in here. But if you don't find out until a week later, it might be hard to figure out, what to do. Last year, Lily Calderwood came over and said, there's another different way that some people are trying. It's using a microscope and actually looking at the cone trichomes, these little yellow balls here. That's where the lupulin is. That's where the aroma comes from. And when those are just right, and just right means you don't want them flat, you want them shaped like an acorn. And you can see here what the picture looks like. Some of them, if you see on end, they will be somewhat flatter still. Once they start to fill out and change color, you don't want them light yellow or pale yellow. You want them a deep gold color. That's when they're ripe. This is us going out in the field last year, taking samples. You can see the color on some of them is different. The nugget were harvested a little bit earlier than the Cascade. They're a little darker color, a little more golden color. And these are the Cascades on September 7th. We actually started harvesting them on September 12th. You can see it's almost there, but not quite ready yet. Yeah, here's some of the flat one, some of the full ones. You can see this looks like the acorn right here. Once you have that, things are pretty ripe, and you might have one or two of them. You want to make sure that you have a large sample that are considered ripe. As far as the oil content on the Cascade, harvesting them early, the oils are really diminished. Once you go to typical, you can see the oils are maximized. Going late, you don't lose much, but the distribution tends to change. And late harvested, from what I understand, late harvested hops tend to have more of the, the sweaty, garlic, oniony flavor and aroma. And Heather, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, because in going through some of the, I guess it wasn't this slide. In one of the others, in the slides that you sent up, it was Cascade that was analyzed, and they actually had the sweaty garlic stuff on the early samples, and they had much better aroma on the late harvested stuff. So we just need to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know with the we did Cascades, and we did a number of them, and the Centennial was the one that seemed to be off to me, but that was we sort of were getting the best components with the early harvest, but I guess I don't remember the Cascade showing that.
Yeah, it was in the slides that you sent me. You just sent me an email.
Okay.
It was the last one.
Okay.
It was I think it was 2010 research from the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that, and I had to look at it 2 or 3 times to make sure I was looking at it right, but that's what it seemed to show.
Right.
So
right.
Anyway, just something else, another quirk of hops.
Well, and we're also, we had a strange year last year, and I think, that's one of the things we were trying to kind of make a point of to growers, is that you can't just go by your typical harvest date or dry matter content, because just because the dry matter content is where it should be doesn't mean the oils have developed, and that seemed to be the case last year. So
yeah, you're going to be seeing all this, but I got to try and find what you sent me.
Okay. We do have a question. Maybe we can answer that while we're looking. How are you viewing the trichomes, Jean? Were you just opening up the cone, or did you make a slide? And what kind of microscope were you using? At what power?
The microscope it's near my desk. I'll see if I can reach it with the cord attached. It's called a vital sign.
Okay.
I wish I could take a picture of it. It's nothing super fancy. Mm-hmm. It's got, different, Lily, if anybody can contact Lily, she'd probably be able to get you better information.
Okay.
It's our aquatic microscope.
Okay, this is just one we happen to have around. We used it when we had fish over here.
Okay.
It's got, the several different lenses under it.
Yeah.
And you open them up and you just try different things.
Okay.
An old school science one.
Yeah, Liz was just saying old school science microscopes, if anybody has them, would work fine. Mm-hmm. You don't need super high powers of magnification. You can actually see the lupulin right down in here. And so I don't think it'd take anything tremendous to be able to see that. This would work out very well, I think, for somebody like me who doesn't have a nose for much of anything. Our gold standard as far as when we're going to harvest and how we're going to do it, I send Liz out in the field and I say, crush some hops and smell them. If they smell good, we'll harvest. If they don't, we won't harvest. We sell aroma. We don't sell alpha. The only, brewers like to see the alpha to see what's there. But I really don't care if the alpha is, 5 or 6 or 8 or 9. Brewers might want it to be close to what the standard is supposed to be for the variety, but we want the aroma to be there. That's what we're selling. So we try and make sure that the aroma is there and the aroma is good. When what we have also done is take samples before we harvest, and there are several local brewers in the area. We go to them, we say, here, smell these, and if they look back at us with a blank stare, we don't harvest. If their eyes light up and they smile, then we harvest, because we know that they got the aromas there. That's about the end of the slides. Other advice or guidelines for people: your fertility should be about done. You shouldn't be fertilizing much more after this time. I know there are places out west that say the plant's growing from now until harvest, and so they keep fertilizing it lightly. Research I've seen says you don't want to fertilize much after the summer solstice, which was last week. We've got one application left to put out. We're going to put that out tomorrow because, like I said, we're trying to delay the plants a little bit to try and get a little less green growth, make them push a little more and not have quite so many leaves. Your weed control, that's something ongoing. I've got a little sign on my desk over here. It's by Bayer Corporation, so obviously they have a vested interest, but it said 3 rules for a productive crop yield is no weeds, no weeds, no weeds. We found that when weeds are all over the place, it's tough to get at the hops. They're much more disease prone because of the moisture that's being held in. And a lot of the nutrients are being taken away from the hops. So weed control should continue. You should be working on your harvesters and your trailers. Make sure everything's checked out. Make sure it's greased. If you're going to rebuild anything, either do it very soon or have it all done. We are in the process of rebuilding our harvester right now. We hope to have it done in another week or so. We're rebuilding all the picking fingers. They were getting all bent. And in talking to people out west, if you see a lot of hops going through, they're not being pulled off. It's probably because the fingers are just getting bent, they're getting broken, and they're just not doing the job they're supposed to do. And you should also be going through your dryer. You should have a burner technician check the burner, make sure everything's set there, because you don't want to get a full tray of hops going out and starting it and finding out your burner doesn't start. Irrigation, like I said, we've been irrigating probably 5 days a week. And that doesn't mean I take the weekends off. I don't irrigate once during the week, and I irrigate once on the weekend to try and keep things separate. This is the time when the plants are getting their maximum leaf surface. They will be very shortly, and that's the maximum evapotranspiration, especially with the hotter weather. And I think UVM did some research a little while back that you haven't been able to find a maximum point of irrigation without increasing the yield. At least Jacob keeps telling me that. Is that correct, Heather?
Yeah, so I just put our irrigation kind of report fact sheet that we did. And definitely this is the time of year that, as the plants are making all their vegetative growth, kind of getting set up for the rest of the season, that they have their maximum uptake of water. So shorting them even 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, is highly detrimental to the yield. Starting to water them around July 15th isn't really, you've already lost yield potential at that point. So it does peak, you sort of do peak in your water needs, and that peak is right about now, or should be right about now.
Yeah, I think I was at the Michigan conference this spring, and somebody was saying that you actually get a little better yield if early in the season and very early when the plants are small, they tend to dry out a little bit. It'll tend to, stress them, and they realize, hey, I got to do something. And how realistic it is, I don't know, but they say you tend to get a little bit better yield if early in the season things are a little bit drier, but then you got to get the water to them, and you got to keep the plant going and keep all the nutrients going up there. If they're bringing fertilizers up 18 feet, it takes a bit of water to move things up that far.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're noticing obviously right now is that it's been very dry. And so we're seeing some fertility stress in plants. And a lot of that has to do with, nutrients not moving. So we got a little bit of rain the other day, and immediately you can see a shift in mineralization of nutrients and uptake as well. So water, we got to get the water out there. I did put a link to the fact sheet in the chat box so people can access that if they need to.
We irrigate out of the Connecticut River, and it's all the water we could ever possibly need. But early in the season, the river is very variable in height. And there's one place where we irrigate from, And a few years ago, that pad was under about 8 feet of water. So we don't irrigate very early in the season. So we put out granular fertilizer, and it was so dry this year that I think we actually lost a lot of the nitrogen to volatilization. And so we've been trying to put down a little extra nitrogen, but I think that might be one of the reasons why things are just a little bit delayed this year. We don't have quite the growth out of them that I thought we would have. Most things are to the wire. Some like the rat cow, which is usually the most aggressive that we have, they're maybe 10, 12 feet tall right now. They still got a ways to go. Most of the others are at or close to the wire.
Yeah.
But, I would much prefer fertigating everything, put it out to fertilize the water. But like I said, if we can't get the pump down near the water, usually in the spring you get enough rain that you put it on the surface and it'll wash in. But this year we were a little bit short on that.
Okay.
That's the extent of
Okay.
my stuff. If anybody has questions or whatever.
We do have some questions rolling in.
Okay.
So everybody that's on the webinar right now, if you could type questions into the Q&A box, that would be helpful. But if you can't figure out what I'm talking about, just put them in the chat box and we'll start going through them. We do have 3 questions that I'm going to launch. So if you could answer these quick poll questions, that would be great. So those should be popping up on your screen. If you could answer those quickly, this helps us gain information to, justify our existence. We want to know that the work that we're doing is helpful to you. Please, if you have suggestions for topics, type them in the chat box or send us an email. One of the suggestions we had from an attendee was it would be great to hear from a local grower. And so we asked Gene if he'd be willing to present, and he was. So again, we want to thank Gene for sharing his information with everybody today. So if you can, please answer the questions, and we will move on to the Q&A. So Gene, one of the questions that folks wanted to know about is if you could go a little bit deeper into the fertility rates that you're using, and then when you're applying that fertility and in what form.
I think if you go to the UVM website, they do have some information on that. And there's also some from, I believe, the Hop Growers of America.
Yep.
We try and get the first fertilization on early May. One seminar I was at, somebody was saying that the first 8 feet of growth on a hop plant are strictly from the reserves of the plant, not of any fertilizer you put down. And so long as the plant has good reserves from the previous year, the first 6 to 8 feet, it doesn't matter if you fertilize it or not, that part's going to be what that part is, and that's not going to help. So you don't need to put it down too early. If you do put it down too early and you get a lot of rain, a lot of it's going to wash away, especially the nitrogen. And so, you don't want it on too early. After that, we'll put down, I think it's about 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre in the first application. Then about 30 and 20, and those are all granular throughout May. And then come the beginning of June, when we can get down by the river and get the pumps in and get that working, we just have one of these totes. I think it's 330 gallon liquid tote of urea ammonium nitrate. And then we'll put down about 50 gallons at a time of that twice a week. And so that's over the entire 17 acres. And like I said, we're just about done. I got one application left. I was going to do it today, but we had rain last night. So just to not get the soil too wet, we're going to put it out tomorrow.
So 50 gallons of, it's 30%, like a 30-0-0?
I think it's 3 point something pounds per gallon. So
Right.
it's about 160 pounds of nitrogen. So that's just about 10 pounds per acre. And we'll do that twice a week for, I think, about 3 weeks.
Okay. June. Okay. So I'm just trying to write this down for folks. First application of 50 pounds N is in early May.
Yes. And when I say 50 pounds N, we do soil tests. Any micronutrients that need to be added, I have those in the granular. We don't put much of any phosphorus down because the soils here are high in phosphorus anyway, but the potassium will be almost the same as the nitrogen. If we're putting down 160 pounds of nitrogen for the season, we'll put down, I think it's about 30 pounds of potassium for the season.
Mhm.
All that will go in the granular part, and then come, beginning of June when we start the fertigation, it'll just be UAN that we put down, just nitrogen.
Okay, great. Okay, if there's any other questions, please, oh, we got one in the chat box now. Oh, no, that's a suggestion for our next webinar. Jill or Jean, can you talk a little more about hilling? Hilling, I'm assuming you do hilling on the farm. I've seen it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
We have done hilling. I'm trying to get away from that a little bit because right now, as I mentioned, this year we're starting to go crosswise to put in the strings.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go crosswise, unless you can crown very aggressively, you got big hills there that you're trying to pull that lift over. And when the guys are 18 feet up in the air, they got to be strapped in well, not to be tossed off. So we're trying to get away from the mechanical hilling and go more with chemical pruning of the hops early in the spring, and then chemical sprays to burn down the lower part of the leaves.
Okay.
So hilling, it does work. When we did it, it was able to cut down a lot on the spikes of downy coming up. It was able to cut down on the weed pressure and smothering the lower weeds, but you're also putting on new weed seeds because wherever you've got bare soil, you're going to have weed seeds. So you've got others starting up, and you have that hill. If you're stringing up and down the rows, it's not a problem. If you're trying to go across like we did, it just gets, very difficult to go over those hills. In fact, we had to get a 100 horsepower tractor to be able to pull the lift over the hills.
Okay, so we have another question. What were your training dates this year?
Training dates were late in May. Hang on a second, I'll tell you exactly. We started training right around the 22nd of May. We trained the Centennial. After that, we trained the Magnum and Tea Maker, and those were on the 23rd. The 25th to the 26th, we trained the Cascade. Let me see, 28th was the Nugget. And the 30th was more of the Nugget, the Mount Rainier, and the Rakow.
So everything was trained by the end of May.
Yes, in
And
about a week span.
Yeah, and that is the goal, folks, to get things trained as soon as you can. And I believe for our area, really, it's very end of May, first week of June, and that hopefully people are done by that point.
Yeah, we used to train a little bit earlier, but excuse me, the Rakow is such an aggressive plant. It'd be like, walking through a rainforest and it'd be so overgrown up top. So this year we're actually trying to cut down a little bit on the nitrogen there, and we trained them a little bit later. So, usually they would have been trained, a week and a half earlier. I mentioned in one of the videos that they were much smaller than the Centennial, and they're usually much bigger than the Centennial. But the yields weren't great out of them as far as the hops. As far as leaves, we were getting, several ton per acre. So, but that's not the part you sell. So we're trying to shift it over to the more important part.
Okay, so people are asking about how you apply the nutrients. So when you put on the granular nitrogen, Gene, are you just basically broadcasting it across the whole area, or do you have a special sort of side dresser that just hits the rows?
We basically took a broken Vicon spreader. Vicon is the pendulum type. And the spout on the back, we cut the end of the spout off. The end is where the diffuser is that spreads the fertilizer all over the place. So we cut that off, so it just throws it one side, throws it the other side. And we just adjust the tractor speed and the height of the spreader, so it just drops right down on the top of the rows. And sometimes, you might miss a little bit, but basically we're putting it in a fairly narrow band right on top of the hops, and that works pretty well. You waste a lot less fertilizer that way.
Great, thank you. And since you're going crossways across the rows, are you running over your irrigation? Do you have to take all the irrigation out? What are the downsides, I guess, to doing that?
For us, the biggest downside is the hills, and we need to work those down, and then it should be better. We did run over the irrigation this year. The type of irrigation we have, it's the blue stripe emitters. So you are supposed to be able to run over those with the tractor. We did run over them with the tractor. As it turns out, some of the emitters themselves inside broke, and so we tend to get a little bit more water out of there. From now on, we'll probably try and take up the hose in the fall when we have a little bit of time, and then we can work the fields a little better, because what we've been doing, we had them on nails about a foot above the ground. You know, each pole has a nail in it. We just raise them up, and there's a cable as part of the hose that we have. We just bring them up, and it gets it off the ground, so it's not quite as wound up and everything, you know, all the stems and everything on the bottom. In the fall, we'd have to cut that stuff away, and we'd lift them up to about 5 feet, and then we could go under with a mower and try and clean the yards that way. And then we'd have to move them back down to go over them, and then move them up to the foot again. So I think what we're going to do at the end of the year, we're just going to pull everything up. We can do whatever we need to do, and then one time we'll go out and just lay them back out.
Great, thank you. Somebody was asking why string cross rows, and I'm not sure, maybe they missed it in your presentation, but again, you started moving that way because it was quicker. It kept the strings from bunching, correct?
Yeah. Can you see the video here? Or the
Yeah.
picture? Am I still on?
You should be. Why don't you share it again, and people could see it.
Let me see. How do we get there? No, that's not it. There we go. Share. Okay. Now can you see it?
Okay, so folks can see this is going down the rows.
Yeah, when you're going like this, they're just tying the strings, and there's nothing to stop the string from sliding. And as the string is pulled out, going, the unit itself is actually obviously going in the direction of the tractor here. As it's pulling it, the string gets tied up sometimes, tangled up, and it'll just pull the strings along. And so instead of having the strings, 3.5, 4 feet apart, you've got them, 10 of them all together. You can correct that by having barbed wire up over here. Like I said, that's expensive. We need another person up there, the third person, instead of just 2 to string. And it just gets, you do it a lot slower, and it takes more labor to do it. By going crossways, this takes a little bit of training, but these guys learned this year. It's not like they've been doing it for years. They just grab 1 string in each hand, and they can tie it. And I don't know that I could do it, but they do it, and they do a good job. And by having the strings lay out to the front instead of to the back, it just tends to pull it out. Since you're not going parallel to the strings, you're going perpendicular, they can't slide sideways. So we end up with a lot better spacing of the strings. We end up with a lot better utilization of the strings.
Great. Thanks, Jean.
Also,
go ahead.
Sometimes the guys have trouble counting to 12. We have 12 plants in between each sets of poles. And they might have 10 strings, they might have 14 strings, just because when you're going along, it's you can only count to 12 so many times before you get confused. This way, you take 1 in each hand, and it depends on the driver. If the driver drives straight and driver drives where he's supposed to be, the strings are all going to be in the right place. And I'm the driver, so if it's wrong, I only got myself to blame.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. There's been a couple of other questions. One, somebody was asking about the PPE, the personal protective equipment that you wear when you're applying pesticides. And I'm
Yep.
assuming whatever it says on the label, but you might want to talk about that a little bit. We have many small growers that aren't as familiar with that.
Yeah, personal protective equipment. Well, number one, when you spray something, there's a re-entry interval also. So you can't go back in the yard to do any type of hand labor within a certain time frame, and the time frame is listed on the label. As everybody sells in any pesticide course you go to, the label is the law. You do what the label says. Personal protective equipment, usually you need gloves, you need boots. You don't want to go in sandals, open-toed sandals or something. Rubber boots are better if you're going to be walking in the stuff. You probably want to have goggles on. You want long pants and long sleeve shirts. The rubber gloves, that's for many things, that's a good idea. It might even be required for everything. I don't remember, but we basically, do whatever the label says to do. There's not anything terribly harmful that we use. I try and stay away from things that say, danger or anything like that. There are some things, and I'm the one spraying, and I'm the one responsible, and so, everything is on me for that. But, do what the label says, and you'll probably be reasonably safe.
Great. Thank you. And that's a really important point for folks that aren't really that familiar with working with pesticides. All pesticides have a label, and just to be clear, the label is the law. And on every pesticide label, it explains, a variety of information. Reading it is essential, obviously, to follow it, and it describes the type of personal protective equipment or gear that you have to wear by law to protect yourself. It tells you the rates that should be used and conditions for which the pesticide should be sprayed, as well as lots of other really, really important information. So can't stress enough the importance of reading and following the label. It is the law. Jean, there's another question about pesticides. What's your pesticide spray program? Can you give any more details about that? What's kind of popping up and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, this time of year, we basically spray preventatively for downy mildew. We haven't seen powdery mildew in the yards. I understand there's some in New York. We haven't seen it. So it's insects and downy mildew that we're concerned about. This year, the insects are minimal. Like I said, we used imidacloprid earlier in the season. We used it as a soil drench. So the plant actually takes it up throughout the plant, and it doesn't kill the bug that lands on it. It kills the bug that starts to eat it. But it's a lot better to kill it when it starts to eat it than have it eat it and lay, 3 generations of eggs and then have to deal with all the rest of it. And so the imidacloprid for us, and again, you got to check the label. It might not be legal in all places, people who are listening, but check the label. That's worked well for us this year, but it's a 1-year trial. So I can't say, too much about it as far as how good it is. Other people have told me it's good. That's why I tried it. The chemicals we use, there's probably 15 or 20 different fungicides that we use. Like I said, we try and vary the groups. Different fungicides or different chemicals belong to different groups. And if there are 10 different chemicals that are in one group and a bug or a fungus becomes immune to one of them, it's immune to all of them. That's how basically the groups are broken down. So you don't want to always use the same group. You want to be able to vary the groups, and we actually mix the groups also. We'll mix, a group 3 and a group 40 and whatever else. I think UVM has some information on that. University of Michigan, or Michigan State, I guess, has done quite a bit of research on that. And you don't want to do one thing. You want to vary it, because bugs are smart, and they'll beat us in any chance they get, and they are very good at becoming resistant on things that they're frequently treated with.
Great, Jean. That's some really good advice. And we do have some pest fact sheets, and then also, management and controls for various pests for hops on our website at UVM, and there's other resources out there as well. I think you made an important point about making sure whatever you're considering spraying, make sure it's registered in the state. So just because Jean is saying something, it doesn't mean that you can use that same material in Vermont or New Hampshire or New York. So you have to check to make sure it's registered in your state. We haven't, go ahead.
Yeah, for a while, there were a lot of pesticides that said, not only for use in Washington, Oregon, Idaho on hops. They might have been legal in your state, but they also have to be legal on the crop that you're going to do. Since hops have been spreading so much, I think there are 28 states now growing hops. The manufacturers have decided to, basically just issue general labels, a general registration where you can use it on hops any place instead of only in those particular regions. And so that has helped us. AIM, I think, was just made available this year. AIM is a burn down, so we use that to clean up the base of the plants a lot. We use it in the initial burn down early in the spring of the plants. So that helps. And like I said, and like Heather said, you got to read the label.
Great. So we have another question. This is about the video, Jean. It says, this is a great video. And the listener is wondering how the V is set up. They can't tell from the video. Are the V's in line with the row or perpendicular to the row of plantings?
One plant will have two strings that go down, and both of them will meet basically at the base of where the poles are. So let me see. There are two strings. It's hard to see from this. I don't know if one of them might be a little better angle. Anyway, with each pole, there are two stringing wires, and that go, the full length of the rows. And there'll be a string on each one, and both those strings will come down and meet, in the row. So it's not V'd this way. It's V'd basically in the same direction as, the tire tracks would be.
Great.
Does that answer? Did I do it right?
I think so. All right. Well, if there's any more questions, please type them into the chat box or the Q&A. We still have a few minutes left if anybody has a burning question. We've been trying to put some links to fact sheets and to websites to help you get more information. So we put a link to the fertility guidelines, a link to the irrigation fact sheet, and Scott put up a link to the website to check for pesticide registration for your state. So that's very helpful as well. There's a lot going on and a lot to sort of know and keep up with this time of the year. Jean, you had asked if we could ask folks if they're starting to see burrs on their hops, and there are 83% of the people that responded to the poll said that yes, their hops are forming burrs at this time. So
okay, yeah, ours started, the Centennial started first. It always is first. It started, I guess, a little over a week ago. And I thought that was a little bit early, but when I looked at last year's records, they started here on June 19th, and last year they started on June 19th. So even with the different crowning dates and so on, and no crowning and spray crowning, and all on the same day.
So,
which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. We also are conducting a study at UVM. So I had mentioned to Jean that we have our older hop yard that we'd like to terminate, but we're trying to finish up a crowning study. And kind of seeing the same results, Jean, as well, that it does, at least from our perspective, yield perspective, it does seem important to crown or chemically prune early as you can to get better yields and quality. So we'll see if that holds true with your study as well.
Yep.
To see. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions. Somebody else commented that they feel the burrs are a bit early as well. And they had also stated that only on the most aggressive crowning do they see burr formation retarded. So it seems like people are having the same observations that you are, Jean. So I guess that's, so that is what it is. Well, great, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time today. I hope the webinar was helpful. And Jean, thank you so much. I know you're busy as well, and appreciate the time that you took to share this with everybody. And all the videos, everything was great. So we really appreciate that. And if we don't have anything else, I think we'll end a few minutes early today. The next webinar is scheduled for July 23rd, so we'll be sending out an announcement on that. And again, if you have any feedback or suggestions on topics or people you'd like to hear from, please send that to myself, Scott, or Susan, and we'll see what we can do. Until then, I would say goodbye and get irrigating.
Goodbye, and everybody have a good year.
Yes, thank you, Jean.
Bye-bye.
Bye.